This is Agriculture Today, and I'm Shelby Varner with the K-State Radio Network. Kicking off today's show is K-State Swine Specialist Mike Tokach as he explains research that has been done at K-State to help make sure sows and nursing pigs continue to be provided appropriate nutrition as litter sizes increase. K-State Assistant Professor in the Department of Agricultural and Biological Engineering, Ed Brokesh, continues the show as he reminds listeners of roadway safety and things that can be done to hopefully reduce incidents. Raymond Cloyd, K-State horticultural entomologist, ends today's show by talking about a few pests that might be trying to enter homes and what can be done to discourage them. That and more is coming up ahead. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we start our Thursday show talking about some research that will be presented at K-State Swine Day with K-State Swine Specialist Mike Tokach. Mike, thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Shelby.
Mike, before we talk about some of the research, wanting to preface of why this research is being done.
Well, we've had a big change in the swine industry in terms of the number of pigs that are produced and the number of pigs that a sow can wean in a litter. Most farmers out there and pig producers that may have left the industry would remember that, 20, 25 years ago, we used to have 8-9 pigs per litter, and that has changed. That we've actually increased the number of pigs weaned across the United States on average by over 3 pigs per litter in the last 20 years. And so now, instead of just under 9 pigs weaned per litter, we have about 12 pigs weaned per litter. And that brings along a very a big change in milk production needs to support that entire litter.
As sows are needing to provide more, how has the nutrition changed for them?
Well, we have to provide the sow with the right nutrient intake in order to allow her to produce enough milk. And so we've done studies looking at several different aspects. One of those, what type of feeder design do we put in front of that sow to allow her to consume feed easily and to try to increase feed intake. And we found that actually a very well-designed dry feeder, we can get a higher level of feed consumption without wasting feed. We sometimes see with wet dry feeders. We've also moved to automated feeders across almost entirely in our industry instead of hand feeding the sows, because we know that sows will like to eat at different times of the day than we sometimes are there to feed them, especially at nighttime in the summer. Here in Kansas is a perfect example, as the sows would take most of their nutrient intake in during those evening hours, and so we want to have them on an automated feeding system so that they can easily access the feed. Another thing that's kind of an old technology, but it's come back, is drip cooling. There was research done at K-State in the 1980s looking at drip cooling of sows. And what I mean by drip cooling is simply placing droplets of water on the sows on their shoulders while they are in the farrowing house so that they can cool them down. As most of us know, sows don't have sweat glands, and so they have to either evaporate the heat off or pant it away. And so evaporating that by using drip cooling is very important. We now have cool cells on barns, almost like air conditioning on most of our farrowing houses. And so the thought was, well, maybe we didn't need that kind of extra cooling because the sows are already being cooled somewhat by the cool cells. But what we found out is that the drip cooling, in addition to the cool cells, helps to further lower that temperature challenge to the sows and allows us to increase feed intake even further and increase weaning weights. And probably another area of nutrient intake that one of our current graduate students has worked on is precision feeding. We know that the nutrient requirements of the sow changes as the litter grows during lactation and as her feed intake pattern changes. And so we need a more nutrient-dense diet in one period of lactation than another. But most of the time we can only feed one diet. And so with this automated feeding, there's technologies now that we can blend diets. And it's not being done on an awful lot of farms today, but that's what's coming in the future. And so we've been learning how do we blend those diets to meet the sow's needs and to, again, increase litter weaning weights while minimizing the feed cost and minimizing the nitrogen and phosphorus excretion and some of those impacts on the environment.
And Mike, have pigs changed to be able to handle larger litter sizes?
think it may surprise some people, but when I was growing up, we used to always want to have a gilt that had a minimum of 12 mammary glands, and so 6 on each side, and that was an excellent gilt. Now that gilt wouldn't cut it in our industry. The number of mammary glands has increased as we've gotten the genetic improvements in litter size, and as the litter size has gone up, and the carcass weights in the industry have gone up, the sows have gotten longer, and as they've gotten longer, they've added more mammary glands. They've also added more ribs. That's something that people aren't always aware of. It used to be that we always thought a pig had 13 ribs. Now almost all pigs have at least 15 ribs on each side, and that also adds that extra mammary glands, and those extra mammary glands, of course, are needed for that extra litter size. If you're going to wean 12 piglets on average in the industry, we know we have some farms that are weaning 15 pigs per litter, and you obviously need more mammary glands if you're going to do that.
What research has been done for when there's more piglets than mammary glands?
That's a great question, and we have one of our graduate students, Abigail Jenkins, did a study this summer that we're going to present at our Swine Day this fall, where she worked with JBS on answering that question, where we placed the number of pigs on the sows with one less than the number of mammary glands, at the same number, one more and two more than the number of mammary glands. And probably the overall summary of that is sows are amazing. I never thought that in the past that we could ever raise more pigs than what they have mammary glands available to them. But when you go on the farms and you watch some of these sows, the piglets, they actually somewhat take turns in terms of nursing. And piglets nurse about once every hour. It's about every 50 minutes or so they'll nurse during the day, and so they actually will switch off, and some of the pigs will be laying down sleeping while another one's up nursing. And so they can actually raise more pigs than they have functioning mammary glands. Pre-weaning mortality does go up just a little bit, so you don't want to get carried away with that kind of situation. But it is a good way to allow us to raise more pigs out of the farm, and realizing that as litter size goes up, we want to have the same number of mammary glands as what we have the number of piglets, but we can raise more pigs than what the mammary glands available are if that has to be the case.
How does split suckling play into that?
Well, split suckling is a technology where we split up the litter the first 24 hours after they're born and nurse part of the litter initially, and then take some of those pigs away and nurse the rest of the piglets. And this is really important if you have very large litter sizes. For one sow, as an example, more than what she has, again, number of mammary glands. It's also very important for the smallest pigs in the litter because they're the ones that need the colostrum intake the most. We have very good research now that shows that the biggest pigs in the litter, colostrum intake's important, but they'll survive without it. But those smallest pigs, their mortality is very high if they don't get the colostrum intake, and so that's where the focus really needs to be: is the smallest half of the litter, making sure that they have uninterrupted access to the mammary gland without having to compete with their biggest litter mates, and that's what split suckling is.
How does creep feeding impact piglet size?
Yeah, so these larger litters, we know that from history, again, that creep feed is important to help adapt those pigs to the nursery. And so that's where that technology has gone. We don't really change our litter weaning weight with creep feed, but it gets the pigs associated with the feed, gets them eating while they're still on the sow. And then when they transition to the nursery, they get started on feed more quickly and they grow faster in the nursery. And we've shown that we have lower mortality rates if they've had access to creep feed in the farrowing house.
And Mike, as we're thinking about piglet development, some research you've really worked on looking into conventional versus pre-weaning socialization.
The socialization of the piglets before they're weaned, similar to what I talked about with creep feeding, is we want to try to get those pigs ready to be weaned and to produce well for the rest of their life. And one of those is trying to get them to reduce the amount of stress at the weaning time. One of the stressors that they have is that they're usually introduced to other pen mates, to other litters and piglets that they're not familiar with. So pre-weaning socialization, what it is we mix more of those litters together before weaning to allow them to become accustomed to other piglets. We did a very large study. Larissa Becker, one of our PhD students who recently finished, did a study working with Schwartz Farms here in Kansas, and she did this with over 4,000 pigs over the summertime. And what she found is that it did help us with reducing the stress on those pigs at the transportation. They moved much more easily onto trucks for transport and adjusted to the nursery more easily. The biggest downside we had was we mixed those litters very early, about 6 hours after they were born, and that was probably too early. We actually increased pre-weaning mortality a little bit with the mixing them that early, and so we think we need to come back and look at some of that technology with weaning them mixing them a little bit older, maybe 4 to 6 days after birth, instead of mixing them immediately after birth.
So, Mike, a little bit more research to be done when it comes to socialization for pigs?
Yes, around the socialization area, yes. There's been some research in Europe done on very small numbers. There's some published papers with 5 to 8 litters. We did it in a big way with doing it with over 400 sows per treatment to be able to really test this out in a much bigger fashion. 400 sows per treatment. I think Larissa actually had about 4,000 total sows on the trial, and so had very large numbers to be able to test the technology. And I think that's what's needed to really test out this kind of new information in the industry, is we have to do it under commercial conditions today with larger numbers.
And Mike, people can come hear you guys talk about it at KSU Swine Day. And when is that taking place?
Yes, Swine Day is November 21st. It's a Thursday. It's always the Thursday before Thanksgiving is the easy way to remember when Swine Day is. And we start off the day with a trade show, followed up by all of the research results. And then we have some of our industry partners from JBS, one of our former graduates, Kyle Coble, coming back and talking. And they've done a fabulous job with their production system. And I think people will be interested in hearing some of the things that they've done.
How can people get registered?
Call Katie Smith at 785-532-1267, or you can go online at ksuswine.org, and there's a registration there that you can click on to register online.
Mike, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
All right, thank you very much.
That was K-State Swine Specialist Mike Tokach. If you'd like to attend K-State Swine Day on November 21st, if you get registered before November 13th, it is $25. And if you do it after November 13th or at the door, it is $50. I will put a link in today's show notes on agtoday.net so you can go ahead and get registered. We're cutting to a short break now on Agriculture Today, but we'll be right back. You're tuned in to Agriculture Today, and we continue our Thursday show discussing roadway safety with Assistant Professor in K-State's Department of Agricultural and Biological Engineering, Ed Brokesh. Ed, thanks for joining us today.
Good morning. Glad to be here.
Ed, what are some typical incidents that involve agricultural equipment?
Well, quite often on the roadways, when you have ag equipment traveling, you'll have somebody traveling at a higher rate of speed than they should be, and they'll run up on the backside of a piece of equipment. Most of the time, it is a tractor, but 39% of the time it's a tractor. The rest of the time, it'll be whatever else is out there on the road related to agriculture. The interesting thing about it is that the accidents are either near rear end or a side swipe type situation, either as the passing vehicle doesn't clear the piece of equipment or the oncoming vehicle will get over too far and get into the piece of equipment, whatever it may be. There are a few cases where we have some left-hand turn accidents where somebody's turning into a field or a county road and the driver of the car coming up from behind, or generally it's from behind, doesn't really understand that a piece of ag equipment is going to turn at that point and run into the left side of the vehicle, either the equipment or the tractor. Usually in these accidents, it involves a passenger vehicle, small pickup, small car, utility vehicle, and such. And when you consider the size differential and the weight differential, the car, the passenger vehicle is the one that's going to be taking the brunt of the harm. If there's a fatality or an injury in one of these accidents, it is usually that passenger vehicle. Now, if you have a semi, and we've had recently some accidents where a semi has hit a tractor, the tractor drivers suffered injuries in that. But that's it's a function of energy. Who's got the bigger, larger amount of energy, and that's the person that's going to fare better. The person without the energy, the smaller vehicle, is going to fare worse.
Is there a certain individual that you usually see most commonly involved in these incidents?
Usually it's a younger or less skilled driver, and I'm talking on that respect with regard to the drivers of the tractor or the ag equipment. They are more likely to have a problem. It is under 16, we're seeing that's where some of the tractor driver accidents occur. And then someone that is a hired hand that may not have been trained very well on the equipment usually are more likely to have an accident. Then there's some thought that some of the old guys that maybe grandpa that's coming out to help on the weekends or help out during harvest, that they may not have the fastest reflex time. But the things that we see is that those people they're cagey old people, and they know better to get themselves into trouble. So they're not saying that Grandpa can't get into an accident. He's usually smart enough to stay out of an accident.
Is there a time when these usually occur?
Yeah. So generally, as you can imagine, when producers are on the road between May and October, this is when you have accidents. Generally speaking, most of the accidents will occur in the fall of the year, so it is this time of year where we're seeing it. As you can imagine, we've got a harvest going on, planting of wheat and just different things. So there's a lot happening. And so you can see why there would be more activity and the farmers are stressed and such. So that can be part of the reason. But the one thing that everybody thinks is that it is an accident that happened at first daylight or at twilight or in the dark. And, obviously we're getting less light this time of year. But the numbers indicate that most of these accidents happen between 12 and 6 p.m. So 12 noon and 6 p.m. So afternoon should be bright, sunshiny days, or at least days where there's light and good visibility, and that's not happening.
And we know that these unfortunate events can really happen anywhere, but are there certain times or things that are typically happen that you see these events occur around?
Where they happen typically is on narrow roads or places where there are poor sight lines. Roads without the shoulders are more likely to have these sorts of incidences. Narrow roads, also roads where we've had increased traffic. Say you have a detour of some sort, or there's some event going on and you have maybe a narrow county paved road or even a county gravel dirt road where all of a sudden it has more traffic on it than it normally would handle. The road probably isn't designed to handle that much traffic. The people that are using the road regularly are not used to people on that road or that much traffic on that road, and that can cause some problems.
What are some things that we should really focus on to reduce some chances of these incidences happening?
Well, first off is the people that are roading equipment between fields need to be trained. If you have a young driver or a new hired hand that is unfamiliar with the equipment, let's just not put them in the tractor out there. And one of the things that we've seen is that a lot of these incidents occur with a 16-year-old or younger driver at the wheel, and I would argue that we need to have people that have a driver's license or at least a learner's permit be roading equipment at minimum, that they should have that driver's license or learner's permit at minimum. The other thing is if you're on the road with these machines, you need to drive defensively, and I know a lot of farmers do that. I've talked to producers from time to time, and when I've driven ag equipment on the road, I do it too. We pay attention to the driver behind us, make sure that if they don't have a sight line, that we don't give them the opportunity to put themselves at risk, and do some things to keep them from getting into an accident, even though they may not like it. And that is a real problem. And I'm sure that anybody that's been roaded ag equipment near a larger community has had a rude gesture or two flung their way because of doing what is ultimately for their person behind them safety. The other thing that I would like to suggest is that we need to advocate as a industry that there needs to be more training on our driver's license renewal forms, tests that we take, however long we have to take them to renew our driver's license, that cover this topic. That is one way that we can educate the driving public. And what I'm saying is this is a two-way street. Agriculture has to do certain things, and some of it is we got to make sure our equipment is properly lit and marked, and we need to make sure that this time of year that there's a lot of dirt on our lights and our reflectors on our equipment, that we take some time and dust that off when we're roading it. I've personally come up upon combines traveling from one bean field to another at twilight that if it wasn't for the fact that I knew what it was, I wouldn't have been able to stop otherwise, because it was the piece of equipment was so dirty that the reflectors were covered, and it would have been helpful if the farmer had wiped off the reflectors at the very minimum. The individual did have lights on, so that helped me understand what it was. But there are things that we as producers have to do, and some of that is make sure our lighting and marking is current on our piece of equipment. Some of them are older machines, and we all have that old tractor that we still use, it comes out for harvest to pull a trailer or run an auger or something like that, and that's great. But if you're going to put it on the road, make sure it can be seen on the road, and buy a new SMV, and maybe go and invest in a new light kit for it so that the drivers that may be coming upon that machine can see it. So we can do some things in that respect. But then we also should, I think we need to advocate for some training on the drivers. The other drivers need to learn some things too.
Ed, when it comes to roadway safety, are there any resources you recommend producers take a look at if they're wanting to learn more information?
So we have, if you are concerned about the lighting and marking on ag equipment, there is a website that has samples of how to properly light and mark your ag equipment. It is at AEM, and I think you would search for lighting and marking of ag equipment on that site, and that would get you to it. It's actually a publication that was put together by the AEM and many of my colleagues that I know that work in this area at the different equipment manufacturers were instrumental in building this guide. It's like a 9 or 10-page illustrated guide, and it is really quite good. It is based on the standard that all ag equipment is lit and marked by.
Ed, I appreciate you taking the time to join us today.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
That was Assistant Professor in K-State's Department of Agricultural and Biological Engineering, Ed Brokesh. I will link the resource that he mentioned in today's show notes on agtoday.net. We're cutting to a short break now, but stick around because we have more for you up ahead.
This is Agriculture Today. Along with Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. As temperatures across the state continue to drop, so will outdoor bug activity. K-State horticultural entomologist Raymond Cloyd says that insect activity is going to be minimal this time of year because they're going to be overwintering or be in the overwintering stage. He discusses which insects might be trying to get into your home, as well as the benefits of cleaning up garden debris. Raymond, we're kind of at that point where we're starting to wind down a little bit in terms of insects, but right now they're looking for those warmer spots, so probably some things that are trying to get into the home.
Absolutely, Jeff. I mean, this is where we get to the overwintering stage of insects, where they come in and they're going to spend the winter in homes. And some examples, I'm sure many of you are familiar with those. The Asian ladybird beetle is one that gets in and then congregates on the south side in the among the windows in the corners. And we have the box elder bugs, we have attic flies, we have elm leaf beetle, adults coming in. So how do you keep them from coming in? Well, one thing you can do is seal cracks and crevices, primarily in the south sides of the building. That's where they're going to start, they get warmed and they come in. Sometimes you can spray a pyrethroid-based insecticide, bifenthrin, cyfluthin. Those are two active ingredients, and then that will repel them away. But the easiest one is we call exclusion, and that is just seal cracks and crevices, and that will prevent them from coming in. If they do come in your house, you can vacuum them up and then put them outside. The Asian ladybird beetle, you can vacuum them, don't squish them because they'll have a stain, and then just put them outside and just do that regularly, and that should mitigate the problem from coming in. Yeah, and they're not going to bite. They're just going to find a place to reside and spend the wintertime.
I know a lot of times we have mulch around in the landscape. That's a place where some of these can congregate.
Some of them can congregate in mulch. The millipedes, centipedes, sow-bugs, pill-bugs, which can enter because it's a moist environment, they'll reside in there. Clover mites is another one that we'll be concerned about. The clover mites will start entering the homes, and then people will see these massive entrances or migrations inside the homes. And we do have an extension fact sheet on that. But the best way to deal with the clover mites is, just keep your turf grass away from the foundation. And there are other ways to deal with clover mites. In fact, I'm giving a talk on November 2nd at Blueville on clover mites, and you can attend that, but you can also download our extension publication and get more information about how to deal with clover mites directly entering or indirectly by basically modifying the environment habitat outdoors.
Well, that's something we should probably talk about, is probably the need right now to do some cleanup in the landscape.
That's right, Jeff. Sanitation is critical, and many of the insects will overwinter in debris, squash bug and others. So if your garden is now at the point where it's done, take all your debris. If you have a compost pile that's active, you can put it in there, but if not, don't. And that will remove these overwintering places, hiding sites for some of these insects, vegetable insect pests that you're dealing with, some ornamental pests too. So sanitation, also, cutting back dead or diseased, dying branches on trees, removing annuals and perennials that are done, and then disposing of that debris as fast as possible. That's going to alleviate problems for next year.
I saw a bunch of leaves coming down. I did one mulch mowing in my yard already. That's another area that we want to kind of keep an eye on because we don't want leaves to build up.
Well, really, most of the leaves, like your sycamore oak leaves, you don't want them matting down and basically suffocating your grass or your turf grass. So you can rake them up and put them into bags like I do, and then take them to the transfer station, and then they're basically broken up into humus or some type of compost material, so that's basically renewable. Leaves you can just collect, basically. Now, some leaves that are smaller, or like pine needles, you can use them as mulch. They keep the soil, kind of the temperatures, there's no extremes. They modulate the temperature of the soil so the plants don't have these heaving and high freezing and colding temperatures that they could experience. So contact your hort extension agent about that. But in terms of insects and mites, the oak leaf itch mite is another one that, if you do have oak leaves that possibly could harbor oak leaf itch mites, you definitely do not want to use a blower or whatever, and be careful when you're mowing because you can spread them around.
That's K-State horticultural entomologist Raymond Cloyd with information on overwintering insects as well as cleaning up garden debris. For more information, contact your local county or district extension office. And that'll do it for this edition of Agriculture Today. For Shelby Varner, I'm Jeff Wickman. This is the K-State Radio Network.